Thank you everyone for joining me today. And my special guest, this is like I think the third time I've gotten to speak with Steve Skojec on my podcast, but I've spoken to him a couple of times on his. And I'm really thankful he's here because it's a topic that I hope we discuss today. I'll do my best. I know Steve is much more articulate than I am, but the topic is anger, and that's an issue that I've dealt with probably most of my life. I think a lot of people have too. I think especially a lot of men. I just wanted to, before I start talking to Steve, there's a tweet, Steve, that you posted. This is on March 6th. I know that feels like ancient history on social
It
media,
does, yeah.
but it's only a little over, well, not even 2 months old. But you wrote, this is March 6th, more and more, I don't trust people who have never been through hell and back again. It tends to inhibit their ability to engage in a kind of empathy that sees through anger, bluster, and bravado and recognize the hurt that drives it. Pain recognizes pain and makes compassion possible. Yeah, I got off of social media, not because of that, but soon after that. You were like one of the few like people probably that I know on like your Twitter feed, if you go just to that homepage, everybody that you follow pulls up, but you were one of the people that I usually looked for because there was something in you that I recognized, I think a while ago, is that you have, and I think I know why. I think you had a certain compassion that unfortunately, even among people who are claim to be religious, don't have. So, do you remember that tweet? That tweet?
I do. I had forgotten that I'd written it until you just brought it up. But yeah, no, and I don't remember. I think I may have written it in reference to you partially because I think that was
Oh,
around the time that you were doing your farewell posts. But it may not have just been that. It was more that I find that lately I run into a lot of Catholics online, and I know that the very online space is different than the people that you meet in the real world. Even though those people have to exist in the real world as well, they tend to have a little bit more tact, when you're talking to them in real life. But just
oh,
a
they
lot
won't.
of
Steve, they won't say those things at all
no,
to you.
no. So you don't know who they are,
Yeah.
which doesn't mean that they're not right next to you, at mass or after mass or whatever. But just this really profound lack of compassion for Catholics who are struggling right now, suffering for various reasons, either with their faith or because of abuse or because of combinations of things, which I know is what you've gone through. And this instead, people who are going through something very difficult are met with this triumphalism, and it's basically like, well, it doesn't matter, whatever you're going through, you have no choice, you have to stick it out, you have to do this, it's what God wants you to do. Maybe the guilt trip of look what Jesus did for you, all this kind of stuff. But it's not, there's no understanding of what it's like for someone to have gone through something that makes it psychologically impossible for them to get over whatever the thing is that is the impediment to them doing what they need to do or what they perceive that they need to do. And I think a lot. I've been thinking a lot about this since the Pennsylvania grand jury report came out. When you see how often these priest abusers would use religious imagery, either words, sacramentals, crucifixes, whatever, being inside the actual sanctuary of a church and using those environments or those symbols in their violation of their victims. And I can't help but think what it must be like for someone who has suffered that to then have to try to walk back into a church, and all it does is remind them of that constantly. They're just constantly being triggered back into PTSD because that was what happened to them. And so when someone like that says, I can't physically walk into a church without getting sick, and people say, well, outside the church, there's no salvation. There's a huge disconnect there. Both of those things could be true. And at the same time, we have to find a way to bridge that gap. And so that tweet came out because I really do think people who have gone through something that is so heartrending or mind-breaking, whether it's because of grief or, you know, a difficult marriage or abuse or whatever it is that they've gone through that's really dragged them across the bottom, when they see somebody else who's lashing out, you can see that they're lashing out for a reason that's not what appears on the surface. You know, there's this guy I follow on Twitter who lost his wife to cancer 6 months ago. Oh, and he's mad all the time, and his political commentary is mad. But if you looked at the things that he's tweeting out without knowing that his wife, who he loved so much, died of cancer 6 months ago, you just think he was an asshole.
Yeah.
And really what it is his pain is just coming out of every pore because he loved her so much. And so I don't know, I think it's really important that everybody kind of step back off of their, you know, get off your high horses and actually try to examine what other people are going through.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah. And I mean, you mentioned someone walking into a church. I mean, you don't even have to do that. You can just engage in discussion with other Catholics, let's say on social media. And I mean, it can be triggering because a lot, and you pointed this out more times than I have, is that, you know, sometimes, and I try to be charitable. I don't think a lot of people, especially who interact online, but I don't think they intend to be cruel, but they do. It is a form of like gaslighting that they sometimes engage with people, which is like, oh, where will you go? How can you leave? What will you do? You can't leave. It's like, wow, it's not cool.
No, it's not. And they start making it seem as though you're the problem. You know, the institution and the way that it handles things can never be the problem.
Yeah.
You're the problem.
Yeah. Since we got on social media too, is that one of the things I noticed, and one of the things that why I had to get off, is because, and again, I don't think people intend to do this, but you know, a lot of people said, well, you're angry, Joe. You have a lot of anger. I agree. I do. I'm not in denial. I've been in therapy intensively for 20 years. So, and on and off most of my life. But it's when they offer this sort of advice, which is like, think happy thoughts, pray more. The one I heard the most of was go to the TLM, go to the traditional Latin Mass. It's kind of like it simplifies the problem and it trivializes it.
Yes, 100%.
At the same time.
Yeah,
I don't think
I completely agree.
That, but that's what they do.
No, and because of the state of mind that you're in, I think being told that over and over and over again actually makes you want to go less. And maybe that is where you found the most spiritual nourishment. But when people are trite about it all the time, and it's like, oh, here's the Band-Aid, it's going to fix everything. And you just are like, well, I know it's not going to. Are you really this stupid? Do you really believe that that's all it's going to take? And I personally just get angry at people who do that. It's like, you're completely missing the point. And no, now I don't even want to go there because you're an idiot and you're associated with it.
Yeah. And I put myself in their place because I mean, I didn't want to talk about the church, but I first went to the TLM 20 years ago. And I have to say, looking back, I was pretty arrogant probably at that time because I was raised in San Francisco with a very liberal form of Catholicism, liturgically, morally, theologically, everything. And that was like a total revelation to me. I was like, I found the true church. I'm in the true church. I was like really bought into it completely. And I did become a bit of a jerk thinking, oh, Novus Ordo Catholics are like lost. They're completely, you know, the priests are in. It was really, so when I think about that headspace I was in, I was kind of there too, where I had friends that went to the Novus Ordo and I was like, oh, you guys shouldn't be going. It's not, I would even say, well, it's not the true church. It's not the real mass. And I can see that, because I think and I wrote about this in an article late, just a couple of weeks ago, is that I kind of feel like post-COVID, or in the midst of COVID, there's been a real revival of the TLM in the church. It seems, I don't know,
Yeah.
it seems like before I left
No,
social,
that's happened. Yeah.
oh, there's a lot of people talking about the traditional Latin Mass, where back 20 years ago, people didn't even know what it was,
Yeah.
What is that, You had to
Yeah,
go
and I
to
think,
some funky parish
yeah.
in a bad part of town, and there was like a few people there, and
Yeah, no, I mean, it's changed, and it changed because, as with everything, the bishops just dropped the ball. I mean, maybe they didn't drop it. Maybe they spiked it. They just threw it down. But I mean, they made it so that nobody wanted to go to normal parishes anymore, where they were going to have to, be forced to receive communion on the hand or whatever. And so a lot of people started coming to the Latin Mass just because they wanted to go to a reverent Mass, and not because they'd read their way there or because they thought it was better or anything. They were like, oh, they let me receive on the tongue kneeling. Cool. I'll be there for that. Like, that was it. That was their reason. And now they're staying. I mean, I went to a thing the other night. A friend of mine had a guys' night, cigars and drinks, and just get together with guys and talk. And they were almost all from the parish, and they were almost all new guys. And it was like 25 guys, and most of them had families. And I mean, so you're talking, probably well over 100 new people at our parish that was already massively overcrowded just in the last year. And I mean, 100's probably low. I mean, it could be 200. I don't know.
Yeah, when I first started going 20 years, you had to be hardcore, or you had to be totally desperate to go, because
Yeah.
it was, I mean, I was here in San Francisco. I had to drive up to Sacramento, which was
Yeah, you had to go
9.5
through
drive.
hoops to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, there wasn't anything nearby, and it wasn't a nice parish. It was bad. It was in a rough neighborhood, and
But I think a lot of this is tribal, and I think a lot of the tribal stuff is related to fear. I mean, tying into the theme of this show, I don't want to be all Yoda or anything, but fear really does lead to anger. I mean, people who are afraid deal with that fear by overpowering the emotion of anger a lot of times. And so I think a lot of these people they're very afraid of everything that's going on in the church and in the world. And maybe, a lot of these people, I mean, I get emails from them all the time. They think we're in the end times and all this stuff, and it's scary. I mean, they live in a scary world. Much of it is in their imagination. It's not stuff that they can empirically demonstrate is happening, but they're worried it's coming, And so they live in this fear all the time. And then they go in an identitarian fashion to, I am a traditionalist, or I'm, a conservative Novus Ordo, or I'm whatever, or you could take it outside of the church and into politics and everything else. But people are getting into these camps.
I want to talk about that too.
And the requirements for membership in these camps, I mean, you have to espouse these ideas and you have to use these talking points, and there's no variation allowed. So when I started saying last year that we have to take COVID seriously, it's not just a hoax. Do you know how many people got mad at me and left and sent me emails? And I never said it was the Black Death. I'm not Gavin Newsom. I'm not looking to exploit this for political purposes, and I know that there are people who are, but 3 million people died that wouldn't have died otherwise. And we need to look at that stuff empirically and say, okay, it's a problem, but at the same time, there are people who are exploiting it for their own personal gain. So let's find a reasonable balance. That is complete heresy for the traditionalist tribe, which has now inextricably intertwined itself with Trump politics and with COVID trutherism and with anti-vax everything. And if you try to stand out a little and say, hey guys, maybe let's pump the brakes on the crazy a little bit and look for a happy medium, I mean, you just get booted. And so there's a lot of this that I'm seeing happening. And it ties back to the tweet that you quoted at the beginning. It's like, guys, can you have some compassion for people who have different viewpoints than you? Because they're allowed to not agree with you on everything and still share 95% of what you believe.
Yeah. That's where Archbishop Vigano has been very personally disappointing to me, because I mean, when he first wrote that first letter, I was like, he's a champion,
right?
He's standing up for justice and for those who've been abused. And then he got some people might think they're not tangential matters, but I do. He got into all these other things like American politics.
Yeah.
And I wish he would have laser focused on the abuse crisis in the church.
Yeah.
And stayed there. And then I think he I don't know how to say it, watered down his own brand.
I mean, the way that I've put it for a long time is that he shifted gears from prophet to pundit. You know, when he was out there in the beginning, nobody was saying what he was saying. Nobody had the credibility to say what he said. His original testimony and the couple of follow-ups that came right afterward were clarion calls, and they needed to be heard. But he never provided the evidence that he said that he had, never provided any of the documents. People are still waiting on that. And, you know, I remember hearing at the time that there were sympathetic journalists who said, I don't think he's got anything. I think he's bluffing. I think he's doing this to protect himself. I don't know whether he's got it or not. But then, yeah, like you said, it all went to politics. And I can tell you from experience, because I was publishing some of his letters up until November of last year. And then they got too far off the reservation and he became Catholic QAnon, and I couldn't do it anymore. But I mean, I published his letter to President Trump in early November of last year. It was the last open letter he wrote to him. And I wasn't the only one to publish it. He sent it to all of the outlets that he likes, you know, and we got 43,000 page views in 24 hours on that one article alone, which is astronomically higher than you get on most things. It usually takes a long time to hit that many page views for one post. So he's hugely popular, and he's saying things that are scary exciting to people, and they're buying in. I mean, all you have to, I mean, look at I hate to say it, but look at the Jonestown cult. Look at any of these groups that are saying something big and bad is coming. You'll always have a group of people that are there for that.
Yeah. To use an awful phrase, let me circle back to my topic.
Are we going to start using management jargon here?
So when I've been interested in the topic or the issue of anger for a long time. So I kind of started out with our Lord Jesus Christ. I went to the Bible. This is Luke 6. I can't remember I think it's like 36 or something. Luke 6:36. He wrote, love your enemies and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. And be therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Okay. This was a tough one. Here's since I'm going Orthodox. This is St. John Chrysostom. So this is tough. Bear with me. It'll take me just a minute to read this.
Sure.
Anger is no different than madness. It is a temporary demon, and rather it is worse than having a demon. For one who has a demon may be excused, but the angry man deserves 10,000 punishments, voluntarily casting himself into the pit of destruction, and before the hell which is to come, suffering punishment from this already, by bringing a certain restless turmoil and never silent storm of fury through all the night and through all the day upon the reasoning of the soul. Let me end with this one. This is Saint Seraphim of Sarov. He's a Russian Orthodox saint. It is necessary by all means to try to keep one's spiritual peace and not to become provoked by insults from others. To do this, it is necessary always to restrain oneself from anger. Okay. When I wanted to address this topic, I went to some evolutionary psychology writings. So anger is a survival mechanism, if we want to go back, So it causes a fight response. Now, as people with PTSD or people who have experienced trauma, you tend to have like shrinks, or my psychiatrist will call it, a startled response. And I tend to get very angry at people who I feel are putting me in danger. And
Yeah.
I think that's why you get some angry responses sometimes from, I don't want to say survivors, but people who have experienced trauma, whether
Yeah.
it's in the church or at school or at work. And I think that's where a lot of anger comes from.
I don't think people have a good understanding of what PTSD really is, generally speaking.
I think they do in terms of like military veterans, because
Yeah,
there's been like
exactly.
movies made
But like
about it.
complex PTSD and things like that, they don't really know.
You're
I mean,
right.
I had a counselor that I went to talk to also about anger. And he told me flat out, he's like, I think you've got PTSD. And I was like, that's not for me. That's for guys, who had to go fight in a war and had to shoot a kid, like had to
Viet,
deal with some really awful stuff.
yeah, Vietnam veterans. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, that's where PTSD comes from. Me having an angry dad when I was a kid and this and that, like that's not enough. Like I get that it causes some problems, but he really believed that I had it. And what he explained to me that helped me to kind of understand it is that when you grow up in an environment where you are constantly sensing some kind of danger.
Yeah, Steve, let me interrupt you. Because I've had the same problem. It puts you on edge.
Yeah, you're basically looking for a fight around every corner. Like you're constantly looking for the ambush. It makes you defensive. It makes you overly sensitive. You're always expecting something bad to happen, and so you're coiled all the time.
Yep.
And I think that's what people don't get about PTSD. If you grow up like in a house like I did, where I just got in trouble, I got yelled at a lot for everything because my dad was angry about a lot of other stuff. That was one of the things for me, that it was just like I was constantly waiting to get yelled at. And then that translated even into my married life. I was waiting for my wife to be mad at me about things. And this is stuff I didn't understand about myself. And yet I have been angry and have had a problem with anger for most of my life. And it really was only when I started realizing I'm reacting to stuff based on the way that I grew up. And like there's no reason for this. This is an irrational response. That was when I was able to start getting that anger under control, because I was explosive over stupid things. Some little thing would happen and I'd blow up and I'd be bellowing, and I'm a big guy. And it scares everybody when I start doing that, because it's like a big old bear coming through the house, and like they don't know what's going on, So yeah, I didn't mean to sidetrack you, but
No.
I didn't get PTSD, and I think a lot of people don't, and that it's possible for you to have it even for relatively mundane seeming reasons.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the guys in war situations, PTSD occurs maybe because of something they did.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson talks about that a lot.
Oh, did he? Okay. Or something they witnessed. But there also is a PTSD where it's an environment that you're in, or something that's happened to you. I mean, typically some sort of abusive situation. So that's what and when you learn those patterns of, I don't want to say coping, but when you learn those patterns of behavior early, they're very difficult to break, because it's a dysfunctional way, because I've known this because I'm older than you. I'm 50, but it's exhausting to be that way, to be on alert, all the time. And if somebody it happened to me the other day. I was just out with a friend, and he did something that, it was nothing, but he did something that I perceived as putting me in risk or danger. And I got really angry. I'm like, don't do that.
Right.
Don't go there. Don't pick that up. Don't touch that. It's like it, and I can't, and you have a hard time. I don't know if this is the right term, but like indexing things like, okay, I don't have kids, but maybe something like minor, like somebody cuts you off on the freeway or something. You get angry and annoyed, you let it go, and then they drive off and it's over. But if you're at a park and somebody's bothering one of your children or something, that you should get really angry and get up and get over there and find out but when you're raised reacting in a certain way, it's difficult. You usually go
it's hard to know how to sort of rank the threats, like the DEFCON system. from the 80s and during the Cold War. And it was like, what DEF CON are we at? I don't even know. I'm not sure, because I'm at DEF CON 1 all the time. I'm just angry all the time. And then it's like, you think you're overreacting when you actually should react. And you don't realize you're overreacting when you shouldn't react. And it is, it's a mess inside your head.
You go full throttle right away. And
Yeah.
I think social media that's why one of the reasons I got off is because, especially Twitter, although on Facebook I was experiencing that as well. I mean, I think Twitter, because of the limited number of characters that you can post, I think it causes people to be just very snarky and very nasty.
Yeah.
And Twitter was just being angry all the time. And I what's the point of this? It's just anger, and then my responses are angry.
Yeah.
And I think it got worse. I think Twitter's always been toxic. It's just been a toxic hole. But I think COVID got worse because I think people, it was like their only interaction that they were having.
Yep.
And people were on it too much.
And no, I would agree with you. And it just, the economy of language there, it doesn't leave space for nuance unless you're willing to say, all right, I'm going to make this into a thread. And when you do that, you run the risk of either people not paying attention through the whole thing, or what ends up happening is somebody only reads the one tweet in your thread that they can most easily take out of context. And then they retweet that and they're like, look at what this idiot said. And you're like, that was not my position. That was part of a 5-tweet thing that actually fully explained what my position was. And so it's very, very easy. I mean, I've always called Twitter the dirty street fight of social media. And I think that it does serve a purpose. It's the best medium for exchange of current information happening in real time. Facebook drives me nuts because everybody on there now has to leave a 500 word long comment.
Oh.
And when you're getting 200 comments on a post, I just turn off the notifications on my own posts. I can't read it all. It's too much. But they're very different formats. But yes, I think that social media takes people who are already suffering from an insufficiency of empathy and makes it that much easier for them to feel completely disconnected from the person on the other side. And I mean, I have a number of reasons why I don't like anonymity. I see that there are people who need to use anonymity, but when you got fake names and fake pictures, you cannot, it's not just that person. I can't relate to you because I don't have any idea who you are. I can't look at a picture of your face and say, you know what? You're being kind of a jerk right now, but you actually look like you're a nice person. Like, I can see it on your face. You don't look mean. Maybe you're having a bad day. I mean, there's all these little things that we're told, don't judge a book by a cover and everything, but we are designed to read faces and body language and tone and all that stuff. And it's just not there. So you strip it down to just the bare minimum, and people's thoughtlessness really rises to the top. So yeah, I agree. It can be really bad. And I've been spending a lot less time there myself.
Good. And you would think that people who claim to be religious would kind of rise above.
No, but they're the worst. Let's just be honest. They're arguably the worst people out there.
The sewer, I saw, I can't say everybody, because I would say it's Facebook. I would say the majority of the people on Facebook are really kind and really care. But I've been on there a long time, and I've made friends on there, and I've gotten to know people. There's a minority on there that are quite cruel. Twitter is like I said, it's a sewer, it's a pit. I can't recommend anybody that's having any kind of psychological issues, whether it's depression.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it could push people over the edge, especially now.
I can tell you from my own experience that I would go to Twitter sometimes for catharsis. If I was having a really bad day, or whatever was going on in my life that I wasn't happy about, I'd get on Twitter and be like, let's fight. Let's look for some people to fight with, because that's what I'm in the mood to do. And I don't think I did it consciously. It was kind of in the back of my mind, but I was looking for an argument because I was mad, and I could find people to argue with very easily. And it was, it's like Fight Club, but just with words.
No, my issues with anger, I think, have gone in a different direction than yours, because I really avoid confrontation. I mean, I'll go way out of my way to avoid it, because I find it traumatizing. I don't.
So
find
I'm
it,
weird
I don't
because
I'll do it at all.
I'll do it online because I've been doing it online for such a long time that it's second nature, but I won't do it in person. I'm the last guy in the world who's going to get up and make a scene. I'm just not going to do it. Like there's this comedian, Nate Bargatze, who I find hilarious, but he has this whole bit about how they make him so uncomfortable at Starbucks because they'll ask him for his drink order before he even makes it to the front of the line. And he's like, did you see how everybody just looked at me right then when you asked me what I wanted for my drink? What I want is to not have to order until I get right up to the counter. I don't want to talk out loud. I don't want everybody looking at me. He's like, I will take a drink if they make my drink the wrong way, and I will go outside and drop it in the trash and drive to another Starbucks and ask again, rather than having them correct my drink. So he has this whole bit about this, right? And that's kind of how I feel. Like, I'm just not a guy who wants to make a scene. I hate conflict. And I'm drawn to conflict. And this is something I've never understood about myself. I'll get in the middle of it. And then I'm like, regret. I just have so much regret. Why did I start this? Why did I start this argument? But PTSD and anger and stuff, it all manifests in different ways. So people don't think of me as somebody who avoids conflict because I'm so ready to argue. But really, in real life, I will do anything to avoid it most of the time, unless I get angry enough that I blow up. So there's no middle of the road. There's no calmly me going to you and saying, Joseph, you've done something that makes me feel really uncomfortable, and this is why. I can't do that. I don't know how. I don't know how to say no or to set proper boundaries. I just say, okay, until I'm so mad that I'm just screaming at you because why did you do this to me? And it's something that I've been trying to figure out how to get balance around. But yeah, I'll throw it back to you because now I'm just being confessional here. I don't know.
I think where I've found a place of healing within, a mindset of anger is that I try not to react. Mm-hmm. I tried to hold. So this is one of the things that I read, and it might have been Jordan Peterson too, in evolutionary psychology, is that anger causes you to fight, but it also causes you to repress, to stop, to hold back. So it's like being in a car and having your foot all the way down on the brake and stepping on the gas at the same time.
That's interesting.
It's exhausting because
because you know what that reminds me of is when I was a kid, I used to have these recurring dreams where people would be attacking me and I would try to defend myself, and I would go to hit and something would hold my arm back and I couldn't punch. Like I could never protect myself. And it would happen over and over. And it used to make me feel so frustrated. And that's the first thing I thought of with like having your foot on the brake and the gas at the same time. It's just, you can't even do what you need to do.
That's what anger is, because like I said, it's a survival mechanism, but also within, the modern world and the modern context. I mean, supposedly we have, safeguards within society. We have, laws and religion so that are supposed to protect us. So we don't have to react constantly with aggression to any sort of perceived threat. So we got to hold that back. And anger is not, it's not an emotion that is, it's considered toxic, anger, it really is.
I mean, it does serve a purpose, but I think for many of us, it's been too much of an issue to feel safe letting it serve that purpose. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, you were quoting some guys earlier, but he famously said that he who is not angry when there is just cause for anger is immoral.
I read that.
And so there is a time when we're supposed to get mad about stuff, because as he says, anger looks to the good of justice. And if you can live amid injustice without anger, you are immoral as well as unjust. So anger is an emotion that God puts in us for a reason. And we're supposed to feel it when something unjust happens. And if we don't, then there's something in us that's broken there too. But it's interesting because I think the dangers of anger are much bigger than the potential benefit of anger in a situation like what St. Thomas is talking about.
Yes. That's the difference between righteous anger and, let's say, violent anger. And I think
how do you decide? How do you decide whether your anger is righteous?
They can't parse it out.
Because you usually feel righteous. That's the problem. When you're mad, you feel like you have a reason to be mad, and you'll defend it.
I feel out of control. I feel like my emotions are controlling me. I am not controlling my emotion. And one of the things about anger that I want to warn people about, one of the phrases I've used, and I didn't come up with it, I read it somewhere, but emotions can kill you. And there's been studies done that anger actually causes serious health problems. It's really one of the emotions that will do it. It causes cardiovascular disease. There's a study I found, anger in young men and subsequent premature cardiovascular disease. So a high level of anger in response to stress in young men is associated with an increased risk of subsequent premature CVD, cardiovascular disease.
All right, well, I'm screwed then.
Particular myocardial. So, I mean, Steve, I'm just going to tell people that are listening too. I mean, when I was in my 30s, I had my first heart surgery. My heart was a wreck. And when I went to go see the doctor, when I started having a lot of heart problems, sometimes it's not the age, it's the mileage. Yeah. And I had just put a lot of stress. I mean, I've done other things in my life, but I was angry at that point for 35 years. And it's just so I had, 7-hour heart surgery. And then I've had, thank God, since then, it's been pretty good. But I've had other heart issues. So yeah, anger, you just can't live with. You really have to deal with it. And I'm struggling. I've been angry just the last.
And if you come to a point where you feel like, there's that line in, I don't know if you've ever watched any of like the Marvel superhero movies.
Some of them. Yeah.
There's that line where Bruce Banner, who turns into the Hulk, says, that's my secret. I'm always angry. Like they were asking him, how do you turn into the Hulk when you want to? Don't you have to get angry first? And he goes, that's my secret. I'm always angry. So all he has to do is tap into it. And that was how I lived so much of my life, that I didn't have a sense that what the emotional roller coaster that I was experiencing was abnormal. And I would have those kinds of conversations with my wife, and I would be like, you know what? Yeah, I blow up, but I mean, it's like everybody blows up. That's what it's like. I remember growing up, but you think that way, when you're used to doing it, when you grew up in a house where it happened all the time, it's just like, well, that's just normal. Yeah. And you start being like, hey, I have Italian friends. They always yell at each other. And, you start doing this whole justification process. But when you start seeing the damage, the fallout, the shockwave around you of what that anger is like, and when you start sensing that people who you love are afraid of you because you're volatile or, whatever, I mean, that changes the calculus. And I had to hit a point where I looked around and realized my kids are afraid of me. They're getting anxiety because when I'm around, they don't know if I'm going to blow up. My wife is fed up with it. Like everybody around me is at arm's length. I had to stop. I had to. And so for me now, I err on the other side. And there are going to be people who will no doubt judge me for that, but I'm going to err on the side of compassion and on mercy, because I spent my life hurting the people that I love because I let myself be mad about everything. And you better damn well believe that was also tied to my faith and my sense of things being out of whack, morally speaking, in the world. Going back to St. Thomas, feeling anger when there's an injustice. I was mired in looking at injustices and being angry all the time. So on top of my natural disposition, I had sought out work that took outrage and commoditized it without even really meaning to do that. It was just like, this is bad. We need to fight it. I'm going to go do this. But it becomes like this outrage porn industry. And I feel like that's what a lot of Catholic media has become.
Yes.
Obviously, it's what the mainstream media already was. And I'm watching it destroy people. And it was 3 years, almost 4 years ago now, my wife asked me, why do you do the work that you do if it makes you miserable? Why do you do it? And I said, like, I'd never really even thought about it. It was just, this is what you do because you prioritize this. Church is the most important thing. God is the most important thing. Fight, 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 culture war, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I took a couple of days to think about it because I didn't have a good answer. And I told her, you know what? This is my identity. I have been Catholic Steve. I was never just Steve. I was Steve the Catholic, you know? Everybody knew it. I talked to them about it. I did the stuff since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And that was my whole life. And I was like, when I see what's happening in the church, and I know this isn't what you meant to talk about today, but I can't help it because it ties in for me. But I see what's happening in the church, to me, that crisis is beginning to erase my identity. Are all these things that I always believed in really true?
Yeah.
You know, is it possible that I can continue to believe in this thing that is so manifestly and systematically corrupt that I can't get to the bottom of the abyss? And everywhere I look, there's more outrage and more scandal and more whatever. And so I had to start stepping back, and it's taken me years to say, what would I be without that being my identity? How can I, feng shui my priorities so that, I'm putting my family in the front seat and not like I have to fight for the church because I'm a crusader and Deus Vult, and I need to get the balance right. And I see so many people right now being fed by people, and I'm sure this is across religious media, but Catholic media is where I am, being fed just scandal after scandal, outrage after outrage. And it's like, stay mad, everybody, stay mad. And you're going to stay mad until you get to a point where you're so numb. Then now, I mean, a lot of times I'll read something outrageous and I just roll my eyes because I'm like, well, I'm not surprised. Is anybody surprised? Like they could be sacrificing babies on the altar in the Vatican. And I'd be like, yep, that I saw that coming. That's, you start to feel like that after a while.
Yeah.
And it turns people crazy. I mean, they just become mean. They become incredibly mean if you don't toe the line and hold water for their particular ideology, whatever it is. So you've got all these people who claim to be religious, going back to what you said earlier, fighting each other in just really awful ways. No compassion, no attempt to try to be like, I want to understand your perspective. It's just condemn, purity spiral, condemn. And it's awful.
Yeah, I know.
It's a miserable way to live.
I know. I've been there. You said a lot there. Number one, I'm not sure if it is your natural disposition. I think a lot of these things are learned behaviors.
So yeah, that's what I should have said.
I think they're coping, Also, like Catholic outrage porn. I mean, I got into that too. I mean, if I wrote an article about James Martin, I got a lot of shares and a lot of clicks.
Yep.
And I didn't do it for that reason because I thought I have a personal investment in this. I thought what he was saying needed to be revealed so people could see how crazy it was.
Yeah.
But after the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th, 13th, video and article I did about him, I was kind of like, what good is it anymore? And did Orthodox conservative Catholics make him more famous than he would have been if they hadn't been there?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really good at that. The entire boycott culture, that's what that leads to.
I mean, because I had gone to some of his talks and I was like, oh, okay, we have the older ladies who have gay sons and bought his book. And, I think he's larger than life on Catholic social media, but, so I quit. I stopped doing any of that stuff. But I think it goes back to reacting and then controlling your own emotions. I think when you see an injustice, and or there's an injustice perpetrated upon you, you become angry, and that's a reaction. But I think when there is an attempt at understanding and forgiveness, I think it puts you back in control to a degree. So it gives us back our own capacity, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
So
No, I mean, look, this stuff is complicated. You know, the relationship between anger and fear, I think, is really important for people to recognize.
yeah.
You know, I'm seeing it as somebody who for too long was perpetuating something. You know, my dad and I have a pretty good relationship now, but he was a really angry dude when I was a kid, and he was scary. I mean, he was an athlete, he was a bouncer, he was a big guy, and he was strong, and he was loud, and it was just like, I didn't want to mess with him. He was the youngest of six, but he had like 3 or 4 older brothers who always beat up on him all the time. He would fight anybody. He didn't care. You know, that was my dad.
But you didn't know that when you were a kid.
I knew some of it.
You know your father's background, because I knew very little.
I did know some of it because, you know, we would, I don't know if it was because of my mom talking about it or what, you know, but I knew a lot of things about him. And my dad and I always had this weird relationship. Like, he was very loving and very generous at times, but his default state was stress and anger that turned quickly into rage. And I always knew that he loved me, but I never knew when he was going to blow up. And when he did, it was terrifying because it was over the top every time.
But when you were a kid,
and God bless him, I feel bad because he's going to end up listening to this and be like, "Why are you talking about it?" But it's
you're not
like,
saying anything bad. But
I'm coming to terms with how this has affected me as a father. You know, I'm expecting my 8th child now, and I'm just starting to figure it out.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I mean, it's like, I'm 43, you know, and this is the first year I can say, you know, started about around last summer, where I just don't blow up at people anymore. I finally have gotten past the rage monster just enough that my kids are starting to trust me and everything again. But I look at them and I'm like, the fear that I have created in them is like the fear that was created in me. So will it catalyze into anger for them later on? You know, is the anxiety that comes from PTSD, that constant feeling of something is bad and it's about to happen, that gnawing in the pit of your stomach, that it's just there 24/7, and people who don't have that don't know what that's like. And that can make you so irritable because you physically feel bad all the time. You're emotionally strung out all the time. And so I've tried to explain this to people about how my cup of anger is always right below the surface. And if you add just a tablespoon more of whatever, it's going to overflow. And that's always been a problem for me. And I've got a house full of loud kids, and like dinner time is the hardest time of the day for me because they're all zooming around, running and bouncing off the walls, and they're supposed to be setting the table. And I'm just off of work, and my thoughts are still there, but I'm trying to be present, and they're all talking over each other in the loudest voices possible. And it's sensory overload, and I want to blow every time. And these are things I have to learn how to control, because like you said, when the emotions control you, when they happen so fast that you're like, I didn't even have a second to recognize I was getting angry, and now I'm already yelling. And that was what I used to be like. And I would always apologize, but it was too late. I'd already blown. Like, the volcano was spewing lava, and then in the middle it's like, sorry to burn everyone to death. Hope you're gonna, you know, get some band-aids on that. Like, it's too late. You've already done the damage, you know.
So you know, one thing I wanted to address real quick is I mean, when you were a kid, you said you knew some of your dad's history, but as a kid, you can't really assimilate that into your dad's psyche. I mean, I don't know, maybe some kids could, but I mean, I knew next to nothing about my dad's background. I knew he came from Sicily during World War II, and he came to the United States with, you know, nothing. But I mean, it was much later, especially when I talked to his sister, God rest herself, I learned a lot about my dad's childhood, and I was like, okay. And by then I had sort of come out the other end of gay and all that stuff. And I had started going to shrinks, and I was like, wow, there's a lot there. I can
Yeah.
understand why my father was probably angry a lot of the time and reacted the way he did to things,
Yeah.
because that's the way he was raised. And relatively comparing his upbringing to the way he brought me up, he did fairly well, I would
Yeah,
say.
I mean, and that's a thing I think people don't recognize is that, yeah, you know, you usually have one of two reactions when you have one of these environments growing up. The first is you wind up unintentionally becoming like the parent that you said you were never going to be like. That's what I did. But I mean, I've seen people become the exact opposite because they're like, I'm never going to be like that. And then they go to the opposite extreme. But yeah, it's weird trying to understand, you know, when you're the one getting yelled at, you're not thinking about why you should be sympathetic to this person. But when you dig into how their family treated them, and, you know, there's a lot of things that start changing in your calculus. And then at the same time, you're like, okay, so you did bad things, but you were, I mean, you had bad things done to you, but you were still responsible for your actions. And there has to be a certain level of accountability for that. I have to have that for me. Yeah, I grew up in that volatile environment, but that doesn't excuse me from what I did to my family. And it took time for me to fix it, but I don't get a get out of jail free card. I still hurt people emotionally by being that guy.
Yeah.
And I have to live with that, you know, like that doesn't go away. I get to see the consequences of that from here on out in the way that it plays out in the lives of my children. So the faster you can get the brakes on this, the better. And I just think I spent too long trying to justify being angry some of the time. Now I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be angry at all. And I probably will be occasionally about stuff that is maybe worth it. But that's going to be like the exception. And I'm not going to try to look for an opportunity to be mad. It's just going to creep up on me and I'm going to deal with that. But I'm not going to be like, you know what? There's stuff out there that's going on that you should be mad about. And let's get fired up. And it's like, I don't have room for that in my life anymore. I don't.
No. One of the things too that made me think about this too, while you were talking, is that, I mean, that anger is such an unattractive trait in people,
Yeah.
in other people, and in ourselves. And I think it's caused a lot of people to become medicated, because it's kind of like how, and I don't have an issue with medication because I've been on and off of it most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's benefits, because there's at times where I couldn't see my psychiatrist because I couldn't come out of my room, you know, so
Yeah.
there's not much you can do. So at that point, I've taken medication. But a lot of people think, well, you know, if I can't be angry, if I can't have these emotions, I have to be medicated and I have to drug myself into a stupor. And that's not good, because I think a lot of times, I hear a lot of people talk about depression. Well, somebody's depressed, they have depression. But anger, depression, all of those things, I think they're symptoms of a deeper problem. And I think it's usually trauma or abuse.
I mean, most
It's more,
substance abuse is the same thing. I mean, it's people are trying to make the bad feelings go away.
but you
That's
would be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be. I'm surprised, Steve, by a lot of people who don't realize that. I think they think a lot of times, and I'm not downing this because I don't know much about it, but a lot of people think, oh, I have a chemical imbalance,
yeah.
you know, and I need to take this drug and it'll
Yeah.
click everything back in. And maybe that's the case with some people, I don't know. But I think most of the time, the depression and the anger and the anxiety and the PTSD is caused by a deeper level of abuse and trauma that doesn't get addressed. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's likely. I do think that there are, you know, chemical imbalances are real.
yeah,
There are people who really have these conditions and they don't seem to make sense. They don't have a real origin story for it. It's just something that goes on with them. I also think, but there's so much in our environment too. I mean, which is a whole other tangent, but I mean, the things that we eat
yeah,
and the amount of chemicals that we take in. And I mean, look, better living through chemistry is a demonstrable fact. We're living longer, healthier lives than we ever have.
yeah.
So clearly, the good right now is outweighing the bad on that front, but we are taking a ton of stuff in that's awful for us. I give you a good example. I grew up eating the normal American diet and had no idea that I was extremely gluten intolerant.
Oh.
And I only found out later when I went on a diet.
Oh.
And I got rid of all grains. And when I got back on gluten, it would make me sick. But more than that, it would make me depressed. I would get extremely depressed when I would have a couple of beers, way beyond like what should have happened. And I started putting it together, and I started looking into it. And, basically, if you have to attack itself, your immune system goes into self-attack mode. It causes all this inflammation because it can't figure out what to do with these proteins, and it starts an immune response that has nowhere to go, and it causes all these issues. So I got off of eating that, and a lot of the depression and the random emotional fits and things like that actually went away with it. So that was the first big step for me in getting past that stuff. And you don't realize you have these food sensitivities. I mean, I've known other people. There was one guy I know that he had exhausted all psychological treatment options available for his teenage son.
Oh.
And actually was looking for help from an exorcist.
Wow.
He's like, I don't know what's wrong with him, but he goes into these fugues and he's dangerous when he's in them and all this stuff. So I referred him to an exorcist, and he came back a few months later and he goes, it was gluten.
Wow.
He said, we brought him to a different doctor. He had been hospitalized, psychiatric hospitalization for this 16-year-old kid multiple times. They got him off of eating that stuff, and he actually is living a normal life now.
Thank God.
But it's the kind of thing that, it's crazy because we're dealing with a lot culturally, societally. We're dealing with a lot in our families. We're Gen X. We're the generation of broken homes, or of people who are at least, within the fallout radius of the divorce epidemic and everything else. There's a lot of things we dealt with growing up. And then on top of it, like, we have all these weird environmental factors. I don't think gluten is intrinsically evil. There's been like a 400% increase in celiac disease in the last 20 years. They're doing stuff to the food.
Yeah.
It tastes amazing. They're doing stuff to the food that makes it unpalatable. People have been eating this for thousands of years,
I would tell people to definitely reduce sugar.
Yeah, if
you're refined sugar, if you're having anger issues too.
Yeah, because blood sugar is a huge impact. And I mean, all you have to do is be around a diabetic friend when they need an insulin shot. They get cranky.
Yeah, it makes you manic depressive. The one thing before we jump off of this, I want to jump to another topic, is that people that are on some kind of medication, is it, unfortunately, I've seen people, and I don't know if it's the work of their psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever, they'll go on medication, but I mean, really part and parcel, you need to have some sort of therapy. I mean, I've seen people get psychologically much worse on medication because the underlying issues aren't being addressed.
And a lot of those medications, I mean, they just mess people up. They either make you a zombie, or, we've mentioned Peterson a couple of times. I mean, the benzodiazepine reaction that he had was terrible. And there's another writer that I follow.
Not unusual either.
Yeah. And there's another writer I follow who talked about how his doctor put him on Klonopin, which is a benzodiazepine, if I'm not mistaken. And he was only on it for a couple months, and his massive anxiety problem leveled out, and he felt great. And he was like, I'm ready to get off. And the doctor was like, oh no, you don't just get off of this. You have to wean yourself off. And it took him years, after just a couple of months of solid use, to gradually lower the dosage enough that he can get off. So I think a lot of people just don't recognize the world that you're entering into when you decide, I'm going to just go ahead and voluntarily, alter my brain chemistry on a longer term basis than having a couple of cocktails.
And I think some doctors don't monitor people on these things as well as they should.
I don't think general practitioners even really know what they're doing when they prescribe it. A lot of times they're just like, oh, you have anxiety, and here's some Zoloft, and it's
they shouldn't be prescribing it. Yeah.
I feel like you need specialists to be doing that.
Yeah, I have been prescribed those drugs by a general practitioner and a psychiatrist, and there's a much difference
Yeah.
when you're getting a
And you got to
psychiatrist.
tailor the dose, and you've got to know what the side effects are going to be and whether you have to deal with that with something. Yeah, it's a lot of, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Well, real quick, this is one study that I read. I don't know if it was a study, but it was a scholarly article, and it was talking about the issue of anger. And I thought this fit into anger within a religious context. And it talks about how frustration occurs when you see when you carry out an action with the expectation of a reward, and then you do not receive that reward, or the individual gets angry because the expectation of the reward for doing that action has changed. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I felt that within the Catholic Church a lot of times, because I felt I was living the life I was supposed to live, and the church, oh, I shouldn't say the church, people get angry with me at the church, but there were certain voices within the church was saying, we shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing this. It just makes people naturally angry, because there's a certain expectation placed upon me, and I'm not getting rewarded for it from
So, okay, I want you to
the
explain that a little
church.
bit more. Well, so what kind of reward, what kind of expectation and reward? Can you give me an example?
Well, I've discussed this with other guys that lived the same life as I did, and they said, you know what, I'm kind of the sucker at this point in the church, because I did what I was supposed to. I had a homosexual inclination. I left all that behind. Whatever, I don't have a boyfriend now. I live a chaste life. I do
Yeah.
everything I'm supposed to do. And now the church is saying, well, maybe you were born that way. We're gonna we're
So,
gonna
yeah,
we're
so it
gonna bless
minimizes the sacrifices that
yeah,
you've
we're gonna
made.
bless some of your marriages.
Yeah.
Do the best you can. All this stuff, and it's kind
And
of
so
like,
the end result is why the hell did I make all this effort?
I'm the
Yeah.
sucker at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people felt the exact same way with Amoris Laetitia when, they started saying, well, marriage is just too hard. If you get divorced and remarried, yeah, just life is so hard. You should not have to try. You should
Yeah,
just
I
like
did
get
think
the
of.
sacraments anyway.
I remember a couple at a parish I used to go to, and it's none of my business, but I guess you kind of become familiar with everybody that's there, and they never went up for communion,
Yeah.
ever, ever. But they were always there for Sunday Mass. And then I didn't even bring up the topic, but somebody later said, well, yeah, this is a second marriage. And
Yeah.
they did
And,
that.
and,
They did
and
that for
it's,
years.
yeah, some people did. But I mean, I know that there were a lot of people out there who had very difficult marriages, who had made a lot of sacrifices to, keep going and keep being faithful and everything like that. And Amoris Laetitia comes out and it's almost like, why? Why did we try so hard? Like, what if we could have just gone and married somebody else and been happy, and like it wouldn't have mattered to the church,
Yeah, I can see where people got pissed. You go to Germany and get your same-sex marriage blessed.
Yeah. I mean, and there were people who were pissed who had no desire or intention to be unfaithful to their vows too. I mean, people who were like, no, I believe in this and I'm going to stick it through. But I just find it insulting that you say I don't have to. Because
Another
I mean, yeah.
another stimulus for anger is the sight of another individual engaging in behavior that we believe they should not commit. That was a big source of anger for me in the church.
Yeah. Yes.
Because yeah, not necessarily in terms of abuse, but just seeing what certain priests or bishops were espousing, and knowing
Well, I mean, that's the outrage piece,
not
right?
be, yeah.
I mean, that is what I would describe the emotion of outrage as being. It's the anger you feel when you see someone doing something they're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it is why, I mean, it is the number one most requested flavor of Catholic media in the world. It's look at what this guy is doing that he's not supposed to do. And I think we'd all be very disappointed if the church got itself, in ship shape and started acting like it was supposed to, and then we wouldn't have anything to be outraged by anymore.
And I read some Catholic commentary that some people, writers, had said, well, in the priesthood and in among bishops, there's a lack of anger that bothers them. And I
Yes.
go, I don't know. I've met priests, and I think they're some of the angriest people I've ever met. Because they've had their own issues of abuse and
But is their anger a fruit of powerlessness?
yes,
Because I think that's where the anger in the
that's it.
priesthood comes from, is powerlessness. I
Yes,
think the anger in the episcopacy comes from arrogance.
yes.
It's the kind of anger that I wrote about one time, the description I got from a priest of going to a priestly convocation. And I'll just say that the bishop in question was very well known. And there was a question from a new priest during this priestly convocation pertaining to homosexuality in the clergy. And, what are we supposed to think about this? How prevalent is it? What should we do? Like, is there something we can do to address it?
And the
And
bishop
this
got
bishop
angry.
was visually clearly upset, and had to compose himself. This priest told me, he's like, you could have heard a pin drop in the room.
Wow.
Everybody was mortified that this question would be asked out loud. The bishop is angry. He gets control of himself. He gives some boilerplate language about the dignity of all persons and whatever, right? And but clearly, the lavender cloak over any kind of teaching. And he said the entire room broke into a standing ovation.
Yeah. Wow.
But for him, that was, wow, I don't know why I did this to myself. Why am I in this situation? Like, I totally should not be here. I don't belong here.
Yeah.
But for the bishop to have gotten angry about that question rather than about the problem that the question is trying to get at, that's why I say with the bishops, I see it as arrogance.
I think you hit it on the head. I think the anger in the priesthood is powerlessness, and I think among the bishops, it's questioning their authority. If their authority is questioned, then they become angry.
Yep.
Because I've hit that. How are you on time?
I have all the time we need, because I don't have any plans this morning. So I'm supposed to be writing, and this is just a way of procrastinating. So
I wanted your opinion on something, because I had a different take on it, and I know this feels like ancient history now in pop culture. Did you watch anything of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle?
No, I actively did not do that. I actively chose to avoid that.
I had a different take on it, because I think it related to my issue, the issue of anger and my interest in it. Because I mean, if I think I like to psychoanalyze people.
Mm-hmm.
I like to psychoanalyze myself, maybe because I've been psychoanalyzed so much. But I mean, if you look at Prince Harry, I had a different take on it. He was a kid that his father was in love with somebody else that's not his mother. His mother had some pretty serious mental health issues. I mean, she tried to commit suicide. She admitted that. His mother died quite young, tragically. And then there's a bunch of rumors about him, his illegitimacy, that his father is not really his father.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Right.
Unimaginably horrible. It didn't surprise me growing up in that sort of environment that, I mean, most of I think all of the royal family go into the military at some point. But I mean, he made it more of a career. He was in longer than I think some of them. And he did some tour of duties, I think, over in Afghanistan. And then, I mean, then you have Meghan Markle. She came from a broken home. And she's a pretty girl who got into the entertainment industry. I mean, nothing bad happens there, nothing creepy in Hollywood. And people reacted kind of strongly to them negatively. Yeah. And I was kind of like, boy, they're kind of hurt people. Yeah. I mean, I could see it, especially him, because I knew more about his background than her. Because he's been, I guess, famous longer than her. But people, and to talk about your family in a public way, I think you have to be somewhat angry. I mean, even just privately to confront your family anyway. Yeah. You really have to, because I don't know, families, people kind of pretend a lot that things are cool. You can, even if you're even if you're kind of distant, you'll get together a couple of times a year for weddings or whatever, and you kind of, we're just going to pretend, and we're not going to, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, to have a confrontation with your family is a big deal.
Yeah. No, and
So,
look, I mean, we look for people that we feel comfortable standing in judgment over.
yeah.
As societally, culturally, we look for that. And I think that when we see people that we perceive as having extreme levels of privilege, you know, then we don't look at them as people anymore. They're just fodder for our, you know,
Can I interrupt
opinions.
you? Can I interrupt you
Yeah.
real quick? Because that was one of the things that people criticize them for. Well, they're wealthy, they're in Montecito, and they have a beautiful house, and
Yeah.
he's royal, and blah 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 blah. But you know, I don't know their backgrounds, but I think trauma and abuse and hurt and woundedness can happen to anybody,
Yes,
poor,
absolutely.
rich, you know, no matter your ethnic background, your class, whatever, gender.
Yep.
And I just saw them as hurt people. I'm not.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying is I think that you're probably right. I mean, how many people, you know, do awful things who grew up in idyllic childhoods? Like that's, you know, you don't want to over explain away people's bad behavior because then nobody's guilty of anything, and you know that gets really squishy really fast. But at the same time, I think it's possible to have empathy and compassion and to look at people and say, man, I wouldn't have wanted to be in the situation that they're in. I don't feel like my life is together enough with the pressures that I'm under that I get to go look at that person and say, well, look at them, they're ridiculous. How about I build myself up at their expense? You know, I that is a problem that we have, and we care too damn much about celebrities. And I mean, you know what? I don't have an animosity towards them. I think some of them have unfortunately bought into some very toxic ideology, and they use their popularity to spread it. But I also think it's weird. People don't know what it's like to be them. People don't know what, I mean, you read about things like Robert Downey Jr. Why did he have a problem with drugs? Well, because his dad made him do drugs when he was a kid. You know, there's all these horrible stories that are mixed up in these people's lives. But because there's something on TV, we treat them almost like they're imaginary, like they're characters out of a book.
I think people have bought into the idea that if you're rich and famous, you're going to be happy.
And that doesn't work.
And if you're poor and unknown, you're going to be miserable. You know,
but I mean, religious people more than anyone should recognize. Yeah, it was. I was actually reading about this yesterday. I was writing about. It's called the hedonic treadmill. Psychologically, this is what they call it, and that is the thing where you're pursuing goals that are material in nature or finite in nature, right? So I want this car, I want this house, I want this lifestyle, whatever, and then you get it, and the minute you get it, it's in the past. Now you've had the accomplishment, you have nothing to look forward to, and now you need to go on to the next thing, and it's just stuff all the way down the line, and everybody knows about this, at least as a cliche. This stuff doesn't give you happiness, you know. So people should be able to recognize, just because these people are outrageously wealthy or famous or whatever, it doesn't make their lives happy.
No.
Money doesn't buy happiness. It does buy a certain measure of confidence of, you know what, I'm going to be able to pay all the bills this month. I'm not going to wind up out on the street next month. You know, that isn't happiness, but it sure beats the misery of like not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. But they say that once you get past, like, I don't know, $80,000 a year of income, your quality of life stops going up. I mean, it goes up a little, but it doesn't go up a lot because all your basic needs are taken care of. And now it's just, you're in the superfluous stuff. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. So I don't care if you've got a freaking Bugatti in your driveway. Like, if you've got childhood trauma that's unresolved and your marriage is miserable, you're still not happy.
I think where the issue of anger comes in again is that I think nowadays we kind of have a cult of victimhood, and I've been prey to that, and I've gotten into it. But when I have found is when you get into those groupings that seem very supportive and affirming, you're surrounded by a lot of angry people, and it tends to be not a healthy environment. So,
well, I mean, I don't know if that's a universal thing. Maybe it is, but I do think
Well,
it's
I think
become,
when you define yourself by your victimization,
yeah.
it's not healthy.
So I think though that I mean, specifically Christians in this country, have gotten into this mindset of we're oppressed.
Yeah.
The left is ascendant, and I mean, there's factual basis for this. Antithetical ideology is being pushed in schools. It's being pushed in government. All this stuff. But this, so some of this is absolutely true, and it's damaging. But then we adopt the whole, well, we're victims. We're victims, and I've always felt like I used to get really annoyed with the press releases I'd get from Bill Donahue at the Catholic League, because I was like, you're just making us a victim every time you cry about somebody made a movie and they weren't nice to Catholics. And it's like, nobody would have watched that damn movie if you hadn't issued a press release to 800 million people. You just gave them the publicity that they were looking for. How about you just let idiots be idiots, and market will take care of it? Nobody's going to watch the weird gay Jesus movie. Nobody cares about it. They only care about it because you made them mad, and now they want to know what it is. Stop it. Knock it off with the victim stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I want to talk about pop culture real quick.
Let's do it.
Because you're like the only person that I can, well, within a religious, because a lot of people don't know about it.
Well, yeah, I'm not sufficiently trad, so I still watch movies and TV, and yeah.
Okay. Well, I was a gay guy, so this is really important to me. But because that's our pantheon, is all that stuff,
Right.
So with the issue of anger, and I kind of take everything methodically and here in a historical kind of way. You probably, I wasn't around either. You probably have heard of it, the movie Rebel Without a Cause.
I've heard of it, yes. I don't think I ever watched it.
Oh, okay. 1955, James Dean.
It's James Dean, yeah.
Yeah. So I write about a bunch of movies in my book, but that's probably the one I talk the most about.
I think I've seen you write about it. I just don't recall if I've ever seen it. I used to watch a lot of old movies when I was a kid, but I think I missed that one.
It hits everything: families, fathers, sons, anger, masculinity, everything.
Right.
So there's a great scene in the movie. There's these two boys. James Dean's one. I don't remember the actor, the other actor, but they're gonna play this like game of chicken, where it's like they're gonna drag race towards a cliff, and then whoever jumps out first is like chicken, and whoever stays in the longest, I guess, wins. And then the two cars go over, and these were like stolen junkies that they had stolen, and so
it's like off of a cliff kind of a thing, like they jump out at the last minute. Okay.
Exactly. So they're doing this, and it's a profound film. And I was there's a couple of lines that I really like in it, and James Dean goes to this other boy, and they're standing there, in front of the cars and talking about what they're going to do and how you jump out and blah, 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 blah. And James Dean goes, "What are we doing this for?" And the other boy goes, "We got to do something, don't we?" And I've always been interested in the issue of masculinity, and within like a post, I sound like an egghead. And I'm not. I sound like an academic. I went to Berkeley, but I've always been interested in the issue of masculinity and boyhood and sort of initiation rites within a post-industrial context, and there really aren't any. So there's sort of these. One of the more interesting ones.
This is one of the reasons why we deal with extended adolescence, right? Because we don't have those delineation points
within
anymore.
Like indigenous cultures. There was like an interesting ritual, I think it was in the rainforest, where they would have these mitts, and they would weave in these fire ants when they're alive, and then the boy, sort of as his initiation of manhood, would have put his hand into it. So and I think in pre-industrial cultures, there was not that specifically, physically injurious, but there were certain rituals that the boys would have to go through into manhood, a lot of times, I mean, like in the medieval period, I really like, is that a lot of young men, if they had a certain aptitude for something, they would become an apprentice to like a sculptor or
Sure. Yeah.
whatever, and that was kind of them moving out of the house and
Yep.
leaving. But in this especially like post-industrial America, there wasn't anything. I
No.
mean, the car was sort of a symbol of freedom. So that's why it was interesting in that movie that they used the car, because at 16, that was sort of where,
Yeah.
that's the only thing that we could think of, whereas, okay, you're a boy, now you're a man. You get your driver's license, you got a
Right.
car,
Yeah. No, that's
and you go,
interesting.
yeah, and you
And
go
that's about to
out.
change too. Like, I mean,
Oh,
that still exists to a certain extent, but I mean, they're saying that all the cars are going to be self-driving in about 15 years, and they're going to, that's going to be the way it is, and you're not going to be allowed to bring your human error to the streets of the world because you're going to be the reason why accidents happen.
yeah.
So, I mean, I'm looking at my kids and I'm wondering how many of them are even going to get a driver's license. Already the Teslas are driving around with nobody with their hands on the wheels. I mean, it's happening everywhere.
It's confusing in America too, because you get 16, you can drive,
Yeah.
18, you can
You
join the
can vote
military,
and join the military.
21, you can't drink until you're 21.
Which is stupid.
Legal. It's confusing about where it
Yeah, there's
is.
all these blurred lines.
Yeah, so
I mean, my son, my oldest son is 14 right now, just turned 14 in January. And I'm trying to get him to identify things that he's interested in and to recognize that manhood is a proximate thing. It's no longer a distant thing anymore. Like it's coming, 4 years and you're a legal adult. And if you don't start getting up and doing something, I'm kicking you out. Like, I'll let you hang out if you're going to do something productive for a little while longer, but you need to do something. But it's confusing for him because it's not obvious what it is that he should do. It's not obvious what steps need to be taken to manhood. I don't know how to give him. I can't just make up a ritual arbitrarily.
I'm gonna circle back to anger too. Is it because I think it's confusing, and I think in that movie you saw it where young men don't know where, and I think they get angry, and I think the father in that movie was very feckless. He didn't know what to do, and the mother was it's a real Freudian family, and the mother was very domineering, and the dad was quite passive, and the son just didn't know what to do, and he was angry, and that was why he was a rebel without a cause, and then there was all this tragedy. So I think a lot of young men are just growing up angry, and then they find these sort of substitutes, which is like urban gangs,
so young men being angry is a bigger deal now in different ways than I think we've ever faced before. And I say this
go ahead,
because there is this weird subculture emerging of boys who have reached a conclusion that feminism is so unbelievably toxic and has destroyed their prospects at having a wife who was ever chaste and a traditional family and all this stuff, that they're becoming deeply misogynistic. They are, this whole incel thing. I mean, you've heard about incels, right?
Tell me.
Incels are involuntary celibates.
Oh,
and
yes. Yeah.
They're starting to use this as an identity, and some of the like mass shootings have been incel guys who they're angry at the world. It's kind of like, how in China they have this disparity between males and females because of the paternalistic culture there. It's very preferential towards males. And if you can only have one child, you're going to have a son. You're not going to have a daughter because then they carry on the family name and all this. So in China, there's like 80 million more men than women, which is a huge problem because it's creating all this aggression with no outlet. And it's a big deal in China demographically. And now they're trying to get people to have daughters because they're realizing this is a disaster. But I feel like it's kind of happening here, but it's self-selecting. It's these guys who, they're angry because they feel like they inherited an economy that's garbage from people who didn't care about them. They were told to go to college and got all this debt, but now they're going into a world where they can't get the jobs to pay it back. They can't find a wife. Many of them are addicted to porn, and because of that, they actually have more resentment towards women because they blame the women for why they have the problem. This is just like the guy who did the shooting in Atlanta. He has a sex addiction, so he takes it out on the women that he was going to.
Oh.
And it's like, it's this externalized festering anger that they have about, I'm in a world that doesn't make any sense according to the instincts that I have, as a man, which, are not well formed, they're not well honed, and they're just externalizing it and taking it out on people in ways. Or there's this whole movement called men going their own way, where they've just given up on women altogether. Like, it's not a homosexual movement. It's I don't care. I don't want anything to do with them. And I sense this extreme cynicism and bitterness and anger. And I don't know how the generations break down now, but in the guys who are in their 20s right now, especially, and some into their early 30s. So some are millennials, some are probably Zoomers. I don't know how they break it out. But there's a lot of this anger, and it's teeming beneath the surface. And it's actually where you run into a lot of the nastiest stuff on social media. It's guys in this age group. They're just mad at the world.
And I'm kind of an antique. So when I was a kid, I was playing like Miss Pac-Man. So I'm not familiar with a lot of the games, but when I've seen some of them, I've gone like, oh shit, this is violent and sick. But I can kind of see it within a wider social context. And I'm like, well, I don't know. This is a reversion back to a more primitive form where I guess young men are exploring their masculinity in this like very violent, sick ways. I don't know if people can compartmentalize these things and say, well, this is fantasy and this is real. I think most people can.
I don't know what I don't know what the conditions are for that. I mean, I've played video games since I was a kid. It was always obvious to me what the difference was. The line never got blurred.
Okay.
But there are these guys for whom it does. I do think video games are surrogates for the emotions that men are looking to feel. You go and play a video game, the world is structured, you know what the rules are, you know what you have to do to accomplish something. It's not constantly changing. You don't hold the door for one woman and she says thanks and the next woman yells at you because you're a chauvinist. It's not this ever shifting set of goals. You actually have a linear progression where you pursue a mission and you accomplish something and you get acknowledgement of your success. So what it is, my wife, I think, coined the term that it's basically, it's success porn. You get to have the feeling of doing masculine things. I'm strong, I'm potent, I'm a defender, I go out, I do this stuff, I get the accomplishment, I feel that feeling of success. I have built something in this game, I have completed this mission, I have won this award. And that's the kind of stuff men look for in the real world, and they often don't find it in.
Right.
And so they go in, and this is this, ersatz experience of what you want to be accomplishing in your career, or what you want to be accomplishing, guys who never picked up a gun in real life, they can go out and they can shoot something in a game and they feel like a man. They pick up a sword, they feel like a man, because every little boy, tends to play that way. You give a boy a Barbie doll, he will hold it by the head and turn it into a sword. Yeah. The legs are the sword and he'll just swing it around. And that's just how boys are.
Yeah. There's no forum within modern culture, I think, to explore that. Some people make fun of these people, but I mean, I used to go to like the Highland Games when I lived in Berkeley because it was over in Alameda.
Yeah.
And then there used to be
the Scottish stuff?
Yeah. And then there used to be like sometimes some military reenactment groups, which people make fun of. But I think it's a healthier way to explore those aspects.
Yeah.
You're dealing with real people. And then I have trouble with any kind of fantasy outlets because I especially pornography, because I think ultimately they're not that healthy. So
yeah. No, I mean, there are people who definitely are way too into it. But I do think boys like that feeling of, I have a task.
Yeah.
I know what the parameters are. I can accomplish the task. I can do it in a way that fills that need to be a protector, to be, to go out and fight for something.
Instead of video games, get like, I know I sound like Little House on the Prairie. but instead of like video games, get the dads together and maybe do like some kind of scouting troop or something. I think it's a better way.
I'm not, yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm just trying to explain, I think,
No, I know.
why that kind of thing is so popular.
I get it. I get it.
And I didn't like scouting because I was a nerd.
I know,
I
neither did I.
Instead.
Yeah, I was a Cub Scout. And that's as far as
I think I made it to Webelos. And then they wanted to go camping in Alaska or something. And I was like, it's going to be cold. And I don't like sleeping on the ground. I think I'm going to go home.
Exactly. Are you? Well, you already mentioned it, which is weird because I have a quote here. The movie Fight Club.
Yeah.
Okay. What's a book? It was a book.
Yeah.
I wrote it down. That was in 96. So the book was in 96. The movie was in 99.
Okay.
The book is way better. I know people always say that. This is a great quote. I can never pronounce the author's name. Chuck Palahniuk. I think that's how you say it. He's interestingly enough, he's a gay guy.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is my favorite quote from the book. What you have to understand is your father was your model for God. If you're male and you're Christian and living in America, your father is your model for God. And if you never know your father, if your father bails out or dies or is never at home, what do you believe about God? What you end up doing is you spend your life searching for a father and God. What you have to consider is the possibility that God doesn't like you. Could be God hates you. I love that quote because I think it describes the psychology of a lot of people. Why they're angry, why they're lost, why they're searching, why they get involved in things they shouldn't get involved in. That's it right there.
No, it's dead on.
Isn't it great?
It's dead on.
No, I'm gonna let you go pretty soon. The movie Deadpool.
Yes.
Okay, that's 2016. That movie I watched one time. Mm-hmm. I couldn't watch. It's to me it's extremely disturbing. I know it's supposed to be like a dark comedy. Some of the lines are really like witty.
Yeah.
I mean, for some of the people that haven't seen it, kind of reminded me of Airplane a little bit because like it's like very quick.
And there's a lot of visual gags and stuff like that.
Yeah. And everything is kind of like humor, everything. It's not like, I don't think it's serious at any point. Some of those Marvel, hero, there's action and then there's like a serious.
Yeah.
And, this is just all.
And that's, by the way, that's how the character has always been written.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he just basically did a faithful adaptation of the comic book.
I think I saw him in Wolverine. I think he was in that.
Yeah,
one.
He was in one of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a scene in that movie that's always stuck with me. So 2016. So we're talking like 4 or 5, 6, like almost 6 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Do you remember it? It's with Wade and Vanessa, and they're in a bar. And so when you first meet, here I can't put it.
Oh, when they're doing the thing where they're like trying to out victim each other.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I want to read it real quick. I don't know. I think it explains a lot in that film.
I actually thought it was a really brilliantly done scene.
It is. It is. It's creepy. I guess it's darkly funny.
Yeah.
Is it real? Is it fake? Is it?
Yeah, like they don't really let you off the hook. You get the sense that they start making stuff up as they're going to try to top each other.
I don't, but
they never let you off the hook. Like, so maybe they're not. Maybe they're really telling about their real life.
I think it's real. So it starts with Wade, Deadpool. He goes, rough childhood, rougher than yours. Daddy left me before I was born. Daddy left before I was conceived. Ever had a cigarette put out on your skin? I didn't know there was any other way to put one out. I was molested. Me too, uncle. Uncles, they took turns. I watched my own birthday party from the keyhole of a locked closet, which was also my bedroom. Lucky I slept in a dishwasher box. That made sense of that character, I think, because he was extremely violent. Mm-hmm. He's extremely angry.
Mhm.
That's how he deals with everything. I remember another scene in the movie where he's just like pissed, and he's like, "Give me guns, give me," it's just
Yeah.
that's how he dealt with it.
Yep.
And I think a lot. I think that movie resonated with a lot of, I think, young men, is
Yeah.
because I think that's the way they probably they're dealing with a lot of their abuse or trauma or disappointment, whatever, neglect through anger. I think they're just angry. And
Yeah.
that movie kind of gives you permission to just explore that. I know in a
Mhm.
fan in terms of fantasy, but for me it's a disturbing movie because I think it's psychologically true in a lot of ways.
I think I'm supposed to say it's disturbing. I just found it hilarious, but I have a dark sense of humor, so there's that.
The, okay. The so I wanted to throw
I
that.
don't mean to undermine your point. You're probably right,
You're not undermining.
but I wasn't looking for anything deeper than something that made me laugh, and I got it.
Okay. I think I guess I wanted to bring up that movie to illustrate a point that there's ways to deal with trauma and anger,
Mhm.
and that's definitely not one of them.
Okay.
I mean that's extreme. Of course, people
Oh,
aren't going to
do
do
you
that. And
mean like to live the life of something like that character, or do you mean
I mean,
to
just
make a film
no,
like
it's
that?
it's really impossible to live that life because he's a
Right.
super blowing people
Sure.
up and making people swallow. What was that was a horrible scene. The a cigarette lighter from the car. It was rough. It's a weird film, and I think it's an example of a bad. I think it's a bad psychology. But then some people would say that by watching that film, you can vicariously uh, deal with those emotions. But I don't think you do. I don't. I related it to video games too.
Yeah. I don't know. And there is a Deadpool video game, which is very similar
Is
to
it
that
really?
movie. Yeah. It's very funny, but it's very off.
The thing about humor too is that I remember as a kid, and I've written about this in my book, is that I was friends with kind of a group of like rejects. I
Yeah.
was kind of like spaz, gay, skinny kid. And then there was like a heavy set kid. And then there was another kid that, had some like ADD, maybe some issues or something. And, God bless them all. We were kind of grouped together. And I
Yeah.
remember I've always been very thin skinned, and I didn't deal with teasing or bullying or abuse very well. But I
Hmm.
remember my chubby friend dealt with it by humor and often very self-deprecating. So, I mean, there are different ways of dealing with trauma and anger. I think that movie touched upon that too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I mean, the second one actually is interesting too, because it, you know, spoiler alert, it's a 6-year-old movie, but, his girl that he wants to marry gets murdered in the first movie.
yeah,
And so that's, very traumatizing for him. So he's much angrier in the second movie, really,
yeah.
because that's what's driving him.
Yeah, there's another film that I like, and I wrote about it. You were really kind enough to reference it because then you wrote something. The
Oh,
movie
Aliens.
Aliens from 1986.
Yeah.
Now, see, that's a movie from my teenage years.
Yeah.
I think that was 86. That's another character who dealt with pretty serious anger. I mean,
Yeah.
she's pissed at the
It was
world.
really interesting because I haven't watched that movie in a long time. I watched it in the 6th grade at home alone by myself.
Oh, that was traumatic.
And it was a bad idea because I was scared for a really long time after that. But no, like I haven't seen it in a long time. I did watch Alien a year or two ago, but I haven't watched the second one.
Not as good.
Huh?
Not as
The first
good.
the first one is not. Well, but it was interesting reading your piece, and I just the parallels that you drew were fascinating to me. I could really see that the whole, the Ripley as victim of abuse and being sent back to the scene of the crime versus people, like you in the church.
Yeah. And yeah, she has a great line in that book where excuse me, that movie. She says, "I don't believe this. You guys throw me to the wolves, and now you want me to go back out there. Forget it." I mean, she's very angry,
Yeah.
and I mean, she's seething in those. Sigourney Weaver is such a great actress. She should have won the Academy Award for that movie. She was nominated, but nobody for a sci-fi gets nominated.
Yeah.
And you can just see her I understand that constraint that she has. It's like we were talking about, where you're just ready to explode, but you're just restraining yourself. You're like in a self straitjacket. And in the beginning of that movie, you just see it, and she doesn't know what to do, and she's waking up screaming and having flashbacks to all this stuff. And finally, she just gets desperate and says, I'll go back and I'll face my fears." But the way the interesting, because this is an interesting contrast to Deadpool, is that the way she gets out of the anger is by self-sacrifice for that little girl. She meets that little girl who's also a survivor, but of course is vulnerable in ways that she's not. She's an adult, and she has knowledge that little girl doesn't have. So by identifying with that kid and saying, I'm going to help this person get the hell out of here, that's how I'm going to let go of a lot of her anger. And I know she nukes everything at the end. And
sometimes you have to. It's the only way to be sure.
I know that's the way to release. That's the way to release it too. But it was also by, self-giving. In the context of the church, it's difficult to do that sometimes, because I think in my head I had tried to do that. I'm very angry at the institutional church for allowing certain things, but you know what? I'm going to stick around because I want to help other people. But at a certain point, you beat your head against the wall, and then you kind of feel like you do have to nuke everything, and you don't know what to do. So there's a lot in that movie that I like. So nothing.
I don't know. I mean, what am I going to add to
that? I want to end this topic too. There's a quote from Jane Eyre, and I used it in that essay that I wrote, because that's another person. I don't know if people. Now I'm flipping from films to great novels, but I don't know if people have seen it. There's been movie adaptations of Jane Eyre, but it's a Charlotte Bronte movie. Pretty dark, very dark. It has a happy ending, but it's about a girl that's raised in a, I don't know what you would call it, an orphanage, and it was very abusive. And she wrote this in the book. She wrote, "If people were always kind and obedient to those who are cruel and unjust, the wicked people would have it all their own way. They would never feel afraid, and so they would never alter, but would grow worse and worse." The answer is it to get angry at those people, to change their behaviors?
See, there's just such a problem. I mean, I agree. That's what ends up happening. You get angry because anger feels like empowerment. Anger motivates you to get up and do something and act. But I
guess, Steve, the question I'm asking you, how do you initiate change within like a corrupt system without getting angry? It's very difficult. I know
and
that's a big.
And so this is, I think, part of the problem is endemic to the nature of anger in the first place. Anger, by necessity, has to be a transitory emotion, right? It exists to catalyze action of some kind. It's to change your default state, because as human beings, we tend towards homeostasis. Biologically, psychologically, we're looking for normal. We're always trying to get back to our baselines. And to the extent that we can live a life that feels normal, which is honestly going back to the escapism we talked about earlier, movies, games, whatever, like the escapism that we're going to is to help us reestablish that sense of normalcy, because when we don't have normalcy, we feel displaced and surreal and and unnerved, and we have to confront things that we don't want to deal with, right? So anger exists to pull us out of complacency and homeostasis, and to push us in the direction of action.
I like that.
The problem with a corrupt system
is that you
can't stay angry year after year after year. I mean, it's like burning out your adrenal system. You can't do it.
That's it.
And it starts to make you sick. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had this exact same experience, but there are times when something that should make me angry makes me feel nauseated. Like I just start to feel physically ill because there's a recognition somewhere in the back of my mind, I can't change this. And no matter how mad I get, I am powerless to make this different. And so I don't want to feel these feelings anymore. I can't. And so something in you starts to shut down. I've seen people, who cover things like these scandals and stuff, be so consumed that they lose all sense of decency and judgment. They're just constantly in attack mode about everything 24/7. And it's ugly what it turns them into. And having watched them do that, having felt what it was doing to me, I reached a place where I was like, I got to save anger for when I really need it. I don't need to do this anymore. And I would rather err on the side of just almost of apathy. And I hate to say that, but there comes a point where, and I think you experienced this very profoundly, you did everything you could, and it was time to just pass the baton to somebody else. Nobody was listening to you, and it was killing you. It was killing you to keep saying, there's a fire. We need to get the people out. There's a fire. And everybody's like, well, it's not. It's just a little smoke, or I don't know. I think fire's nice. Like, I don't see, they just, all this cognitive dissonance that you run into when you're trying to warn people that something bad is happening, that drives you nuts. Then you go to the people who can do something about it. They don't care. That drives you nuts. And then you keep discovering it, and you're angry on behalf of the people who are getting hurt by it. And that drives you nuts. And then eventually you come to this point of, why am I a part of this? Why am I a part of this anymore? Why do I want anything to do with this? And you have to pull back, or you're going to lose your mind. So I get why you did what you did. I feel it too. I try to look for the positive in things, but you can't stay mad, and the institution is not getting less corrupt.
No.
And how much are you supposed to sacrifice yourself, your health, mental and physical? How much are you being asked by God to do this?
There are people
be the martyr that you said you don't want to be.
There are people, actively online that call out people to be martyrs. I think it's really sick. I think it's really sick when you're,
only God can call you to that.
You don't know what people's psychological state is. You could be, that's really a sick thing to do. I mean, I think you going back and ending with that tweet that I read at the very, very beginning, I think you've had some compassion, because I think you've been to a place of pain and woundedness. There's a great line in William Sturion's Sophie's Choice, the book, and he talks about the butchered and the betrayed. And I've always gone back to that line, because I've seen people be butchered and betrayed, and I just have a natural sympathy for them. Rose McGowan just did an interview just the other day with Fox, and she was talking about politics, but she said, I was raised in a cult, and she I understand. She goes, it gives me superpowers. She goes, it gives me the power to kind of recognize this stuff. And I think when I'm not talking like a Gnostic, but I think when you've experienced some pain, especially early on in your life, I just think you're sensitive to it. And
we've done an entire show about the legionaries, but my experience with them has absolutely primed me to look for cult behavior in other places. And even still, I mean, confirmation bias is strong. There is definite cult behavior that happens within the church. Does that make the Catholic Church a cult? I'm not prepared to say that affirmatively, because there are distinctions that need to be made between the people who run the thing and the thing itself, although sometimes those are very hard to make. But I see this cult behavior, and I see it in the faithful adherents of Catholicism. And the first thing they want to do is silence you when you start trying to make noise about a problem, because they're worried about the integrity of the institution more than about the person who's being affected by whatever's going on.
And they're angry. And I think I became so angry in the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church, I mean, religion is so integral. It's such an integral part of my daily life.
Right.
And for most of my life, it's been attached to Catholicism. So when I see it going down, I'm just with my fingernails trying to hold on to this, I get angry. And I get angry at the people that I feel like are pulling it away, or corrupting it, or tainting it, or destroying it, or changing it, or whatever. So I get why people kind of really group up and say, we're going to save it, we're going to protect it, we're going to preserve it here. And then you get angry with people, left, right, middle, center, conservative, liberal, that you feel that are going to jeopardize that again. It's an anger response. I think it goes back to that survival instinct that, you're jeopardizing me. I mean, you're risking my spiritual well-being by what you're doing. And it's just become sick and not good and a mess. So
it does. So I don't know how we did on this topic.
I think we
talked about a lot of things.
Yeah, I think we did really well. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, one word of hope I would just give people is that, if you feel yourself overcome by anger, if you're angry all the time, like I was, and if you've been angry for years, there's like no shame in seeking out psychological help. I mean, you can do spiritual direction is fine, but priests, ministers, clergy, they're not
trained for it.
No. So,
and the honest ones will tell you, look, this is not what they taught me in seminary. I can give spiritual counsel, but I'm not a therapist. And they often feel like they're in a bad spot when they have to do that, because they don't know how to do it correctly, unless, they've got the training. Some do, but most don't.
Yeah. And men have a hard time. I think at night they'll say, I'll have a drink, it'll take the edge off.
Yeah.
I'll be a little nicer. Now they're token up here in California. I'll just deaden everything. And that's not the way to go either. I think, and I was surprised because you went there right in the beginning. I think you have to be open and honest about yourself, your past, your history, your childhood, everything, your emotion. That's so hard it sounds like so simple, but for men, especially men, women do that. They interact.
No, I mean, and you get attacked. You get attacked for doing it. I've
seen it happen to you.
Yeah, I've been open about stuff that I'm going through, and I get these nasty emails about what a woman I'm being and all this stuff. And it's like, you know what, dude, go pound sand.
Or they throw it back in your face.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I don't care. You know what matters to me? Not you, random person on the internet who I don't know. What matters to me is the woman that I've lived with for the last 17 years and all of these kids. And they're the ones that matter. Like, if I have to do this to be the guy they need, I'm not even going to say, because this is a family friendly show, I'm not even going to say what I want. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. But yeah, that's kind of how I want to leave it. There's no shame in asking for help, but there's really shame in staying quiet and just staying angry. That's the only thing. So.
Yeah.
Hey, God bless you, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joseph. You too.